When you've been lying about something for so long, it becomes second nature.
How are you, Gretchen?
It's all over town that you're reopening the investigation.
Luke drove to his house at 4:30, killed his family, and headed here to kill himself.
You're convinced he did it?
What do you think?
I'm an old mate of Luke's, actually.
You lied back then, Aaron. Luke lied as well. The day that poor girl drowned. Ellie.
So you've heard some stories about me.
I've heard some.
I have personal history with the girl who died in a river 20 years ago.
There's a connection between the deaths.
It's pigs.
This has got nothing to do with me.
Grant.
Don't say my name like you know me. You don't know me.
Jamie Sullivan. He's lying. He wasn't with his nan.
You think you're going to get the truth in a town like this? When you've been lying about something for so long, it becomes second nature.
Where were you that afternoon?
Why would I lie?
Because Luke asked you to.
Sometimes when this place feels kind of empty,
Did you have anything to do with that girl's death?
and all of the breath fades into life.
People remember what you did.
Wish I knew what you were looking for. Might have known what you would want. Under the Milky Way tonight.
The Australian landscape is so inspiring. It's an absolute gift for a writer. It inspires me every single day in every single book. It's something that I think completely drives the stories that I want to tell. It completely shapes the characters that I like to write about. My name's Jane Harper, and I'm the author of 4 Australian mystery novels. I worked as a print journalist for 13 years. It was all I'd ever done professionally, and I always thought one day I would love to write a book. So I had a good grounding. I knew how to get words on a page, and I knew how to kind of express myself clearly on paper, but a lot of it was about finding that time. So I'd get up maybe an hour earlier in the mornings, and I'd do a single hour, and then I'd get ready and go to work, and I'd come home from work and I'd stay in my work clothes, sit down at the computer, and I'd do 1 hour. And the more I did, the more I wanted to do, and the more I felt, well, I've come so far, I should try and really finish this thing that I've wanted to do for a lot of years. When I look back on writing The Dry, it's funny because I feel like I was completely fearless writing that book. I had no expectation that anyone would ever read it. All I wanted to do was finish it. I entered it into an unpublished manuscript award, and I actually won that award. So suddenly I had all this interest from agents and publishers who wanted to read it.
Did you have anything to do with that girl's death?
The Dry was optioned for film before it was published. It was published in 2016, and straight away they were starting to work on the film.
So you've heard some stories about me.
I've heard some.
And then having someone like Eric Bana sign on to play the lead role, I mean, that really is, what more can you ask for? I got to go up on sets and see them filming, which was really exciting. And I think it was really surreal to step into this scene where I could remember writing certain parts of it, lines of dialogue or characters' names, and then seeing it brought to life in this very realistic way was a really odd but exciting moment. When I sit down to write, I'm really focused on the story, and really I spend longer planning and thinking about the book than I actually do writing it. I think for me, having that structure is a really important part of the process. Because I think with the mystery books, you want to have those twists and turns that keep the reader engaged and ideally keep them guessing right to the end.
Jane's work ethic is exceptional. Yeah, she's probably one of the hardest workers I've ever met. She has this attitude that you can learn pretty much anything with enough trial and error and effort.
I have 2 kids now, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So it's quite busy to have 2 children plus write full time. My children are so important, and it's so lovely to have them, alongside writing the books. It's been a really special few years, and I'm looking forward to one day them reading the books, I guess. And that's something that I bear in mind when I'm writing as well. That one day, they will open these books hopefully, and kind of think what they're going to get from them. One of the big misconceptions about creative industries is that it's about like that lightning strike and that idea that just hits you. And I always try and demystify people of that. Pete was a pug, and I'm sorry to say he was greedy and selfish in most every way. There's no point sitting around waiting for suddenly this burst of inspiration, because it's probably not going to happen like that. But pigs cannot fly. You don't know if a publisher's going to pick up your book. You don't know how the readers are going to respond. All you can do is write the best possible book you can. And I think, for me, that's always about writing a story that I know that I would like to read. Wow, pigs on the net. Before this latest book, The Lost Man, I went to all the way to sort of outback Queensland, which for those of you who, I'm not sure how familiar with the geography, but it's in the sort of northeast but very central. So it's kind of, it's what we call the interior, and that's like real sort of full-on outback, where it gets to well over, like I looked up, like 105 degrees plus, like regularly, sort of every day. It's very isolated, and it's a really, really sort of brutal landscape. But people live out there, and they make their livelihoods out there. And I think I just became really interested in those kind of communities where they're so isolated, but they, and it impacts every aspect of their lives, and that's kind of how I started to come up with the idea for the book. With all the books and all the kind of, I guess the stories and the way they play out, I think for me I always try and think of tapping into kind of the authenticity and making, scenarios believable. And a big part of that is kind of, I guess, looking at, how mundane life can be often, and how people can make difficult decisions and do, really things that maybe they otherwise would never dream of doing for certain reasons, which often are not, they're not dramatic, and they're not sort of James Bond type, situations. They're just normal people who've been pushed to a point of desperation and have been forced to act. And I sort of feel that's a line that, a lot of us, thank goodness, never get pushed to, but it's, it's potential for everybody, really, depending on their situation and their lifestyle.
So in your new book, landscape actually turns out to be the murder weapon. So can you tell us about the stockman? This all happens right at the beginning, so no spoilers. About the stockman's grave, and then how the person dies in its vicinity.
Yeah, so in the Lost Man, it opens up in the prologue. So it is sort of the first pages. We open up with the death of a man, and he is found in the middle of nowhere on this really isolated cattle property, and he's the middle one of 3 brothers who've all grown up. So they're all outback men through and through. They know what they're doing out there. They've got the cars, full of supplies. They know what the weather's like, and they know how to survive and thrive in that environment. But this particular man is found dead miles from his home and from his car, and he's found dead on at one of the few man-made landmarks in the whole area, which is this Stockman's grave, which is not actually a real. It's not a real landmark, but it's based on. It's actually based on real things that I discovered during my research. So Stockman's grave itself is not real, but that concept of in the outback they have these quite unusual sort of instances where someone has died, in the middle of nowhere, and if they're lucky, someone's come along later and put up a bit of a memorial to them. So you can just be in the middle of the desert and you see these really incredibly ornate graves just standing all alone, which I thought was a really striking, visual, opportunities, and I couldn't sort of resist putting it in the book. So, so we open up with this this man found, at this sort of single man-made landmark in the middle of nowhere.
But what's really horrifying is that it's clear that he's been circling around it. You can see it, you can read it in the land, and he's desperately trying to find shape, because there he is under this, incredible sun without anything to protect him. And so you can see that he tried the best he could, right, to stay
Yeah,
in shape.
and I think that was something that really struck me when I was out there. And I'm sure actually that's something that probably is familiar to a lot of people in this area as well, when you can feel that kind of that burning sort of heat, you know, and you're just sort of seeking out that, you know, you're standing in the sort of corner of, you know, a tiny little bit of shade thrown by, you know, like a tiny tree, and this, and I think it's that sort of instinct is something that I think a lot of you guys here would recognise.
How long did it take your guy to die?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually one of the interesting things when I went out there. So for this book, actually, what I did, I approached the writing process slightly differently than I had before. So I'd always, for all the books, I'd always planned and I'd always sort of known where I wanted the story to go, and I'd known the ending, and I'd known a few pieces along the way. But this time I completely sort of separated out the writing and the planning process. So I just spent quite a few months planning and researching and drawing up a bit of a map as to what I wanted to happen. And then I went out to do sort of the on-the-ground research. So when I went out there, I already had quite a strong idea of what I wanted to happen, and it involved, you know, the heat and the exposure and this lack of shade. But I remember thinking, gosh, you know, I haven't kind of overdone this. Like maybe I've sort of slightly exaggerated the sort of the dangers here, but I could probably get away with it. Like I can probably sort of make it work. And then when I went out there and I was speaking to people, or even just being out myself, the most interesting was how I completely underestimated how dangerous it really is, and you know, and in terms of the length of time people survive. I mean, we're talking, you know, if you're unlucky, I mean, it could be hours. We're not even talking a full day really. And young, healthy guys, and there's all these sort of terrible stories about, you know, young guys in their 20s who are sort of just a few kilometres from home, and they think they can walk there, and they get disoriented, and then they start walking back, and they just get completely lost, and they get found, you know, really if they just stayed with their vehicle and waited for help. And there's so many stories like that of tourists, and so I think that sort of surprised me a little bit. I really loved writing this book. Like, it was so much fun, and I think, you know, the whole thing I just thoroughly enjoyed. I mean, from the research stage through to kind of exploring the new characters. Because I should actually mention this is a standalone. So the first two books, you know, have the same recurring character in Aaron Falk, who's an investigator in Melbourne. But with this one being set in such an outback region, I just knew unless he was on some sort of like four-wheel drive holiday, it wasn't going to, you know, be the story for him. But I think, you know, it was really enjoyable for me to get to know like these new characters and sort of build them up from scratch. And I absolutely loved writing about them. I still think about them a lot. I mean, particularly Nathan, who's the main character, and sort of unpacking, I guess, all the background that kind of makes him the man he is was really very interesting for me as a writer.